Bill, thank you so much for joining us today on the Athletics of Business podcast. I am fired up to have you here. This is going to be a great conversation.
Ed, thank you. It's an honor to be with you, and I mean that sincerely.
Well, I appreciate that. It's funny because it's almost, we don't know where to begin. There's so much to talk about. I mean, we connected here a few weeks ago, and there's so many things we have in common. We speak the same language, and everything. My reaching out to you, Bill, stemmed from your book, The Coaching Effect. And the more I dove into it, the more I read that, the more I read your story. I just could not wait to have you on the podcast. So can you share your journey with our listeners, a little bit about your journey and what kind of was the catalyst, not kind of was the catalyst to starting Excel Institute?
um, I think it's funny that so many people like you, they want to begin there. And the ironic part of this is it's the part I didn't want to talk about. I don't mean now. Right. I mean, in terms of this journey.
Absolutely.
And I think the best way to set it up is to share a quick story to give you an idea. So I was sitting at our conference table in our office with, this is several years ago, with my work family. And I asked them to join me because I was working on the TED Talk. Mm-hmm. And specifically, I was working on the opening of that talk. Mm-hmm. And I needed their feedback. And I was trying to come up with an anecdote or a story or a segue mm-hmm. that would lead into this whole growth only occurs in a state of discomfort concept in the science that we're studying. And so I was running by these different ideas. And this was a life-changing statement. Our VP of sales, whom I think you're connected to on LinkedIn, absolutely. Will Clefcorn.
Yep.
He looks at me and he says, absolutely just straight up candid, he said, hey, Bill, why don't you just tell the truth? Mm. And I remember looking at him and I thought, what do you mean? And he caught me so off guard. I didn't say a word. And then he looks at me and he says it again. He goes, Bill, why don't you just tell the truth? And I was visibly shaken. And I kind of looked at him. I said, as if he was accusing me of lying. I said, what do you mean, tell the truth? Where is this coming from? I don't understand. I almost feel like I'm being attacked. And he said, well, why don't you tell them why we're sitting at this table today? Why don't you start off your TED Talk and tell everybody why we have jobs? Why don't you tell everybody that the only reason we're all here is because you got fired from your job back in 2008.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'll never forget it because I leaned back in my chair mm-hmm. and I said, okay, so let me get this straight. You want me to tell 1,600, this is not a short story I wanted to share. Because this is humiliating. You know, I said, you want me to tell an audience of 1,600 people, and this is the funny part. And what I had hoped would be another 1,000 or 2,000 on YouTube.
Right.
Well, I said, you want me to share the most humiliating event of my life to date. And everybody sat around the table and went, yeah, that's a great idea. And here's what happened. I said, well, excuse me for not buying in. I said, that would be humiliating. It would be totally awkward. And I'd feel uncomfortable. And there was that word.
Yeah.
So that, and it's just like, that was it. It's like, I was going to give a talk on the need to be uncomfortable in order to grow. Right. And I was afraid to go there myself. Mm-hmm. So back to the question about the journey. Oh, by the way, 1,600 people did hear the opening about getting fired. And since then, it wasn't 1,000 or 2,000. It's been now 4 million.
4 million. Yep.
So the journey, the professional journey, I think that everybody really wants to understand or know more about is the fact that, I was EVP of business development in a publicly traded company. Mm-hmm. And one day after a record year of sales, I got called into the president's office, or actually in a conference room. And he just kind of laid out that we're making some changes and you're not in them. Time to pack your bags and go. Wow. And that was more life-changing than I thought it would be. Mm-hmm. In the moment, we're in chaos. It's, I could still, that's why our egos can never get so big, because I could still literally think back to coming home, walking in the kitchen and sharing, it's like 2:00 in the afternoon, sharing with my wife what had just happened. And seeing the look on her face. And I went upstairs and I kind of laid down, I laid down in bed. And then she said, well, what do you want me to tell the kids when they come home? And I said, nothing. I said, I'll tell them. And so you sit there at the dinner table and the kids are like, what are you doing home, Dad? Weird. That's a humbling moment. And from that point on, everybody says, well, would you have started a business anyway? And my response is, I don't know. Probably not, because I was too comfortable. I was making too much money. Life was good. Probably. So the answer, as much as I would have said yes at the time, the answer realistically probably would have been no. So that moment, the chaos eventually evolved into something else, and it allowed me to go do some things and try some things that, the point of it, I suppose, all is that Ed, you and I are on the phone today because I got fired in 2008.
Yeah. Thank you, Will, for suggesting that for the TED Talk too. Hey, that took some courage on his part to suggest that too. Speaking of being uncomfortable.
I think our team has good psychological safety at work, so they feel like they can say anything they want to say. Yeah. And he certainly proved that. But I do. The funny part was nobody, it just didn't, I'm the only one who was caught off guard by it. So anyway, yeah, it turned out well. But the other funny part was, so the talk's on discomfort, but probably in the first year following the TED Talk, I was asked to do more podcasts and speaking engagements around the topic of getting fired and kind of reinventing yourself than anything else.
Yep.
Which is the thing I wanted to do the least.
Yeah. Did you just let Will sit on those podcasts for you? Will,
yeah, he should. That's a good idea. Hey, take this one for me, pal.
All right, there you go, buddy. You had that idea. You got it. Now that's incredible. But I love in the book, The Coaching Effect, and we're going to talk more about that. We'll put the link in the show notes to get the book. But being in a state of discomfort is the only way a person can grow, and that goes against the school of thought and the grain of so many folks in our society today, which I think that's one of the reasons I couldn't put the book down, because I just love the fact that someone had the courage, the insight, and the intestinal fortitude to actually write that and to live it. Can you talk about that? I mean, just talk about how you went from there to the growth rings.
Well, the idea is and that's a insightful question, but when we started the Excel Institute, let's say I and Will, who was my first hire, there's a lot of things I'm not good at, but the one thing I am good at is identifying and acquiring talent. And they just make people like me look really, really good. So this journey began way back in 2009 when I'm always fascinated with a coach's impact on growth. Now, I'll use the term coach versus leader, whether it's a business setting, athletic setting, or educational setting. We work in all three of those, those fields.
Okay.
So that's always fascinated me. And I remember when I was younger, I couldn't ever figure out, my younger mind couldn't get my head around why Nebraska football would win so consistently when the only common denominator were coaches, Bob Devaney and Tom Osborne.
Right.
I remember thinking, so then I started to watch coaches on the sideline and read interviews and watch interviews with coaches more than I would clips of the game. And then when you talk to people, and Ed, I'm sure if you talk to anybody, and I'll ask you the question, this is not a pre-staged question, but I know how you'll answer it. Do you believe the performance of a team reflects how that team is coached?
I believe a team is a direct reflection of their head coach and their coaching staff. I absolutely think, there's so much to be said about the impact a coach can have on the performance.
So everybody with any wherewithal, with any experience, with any believes what you just said and knows that to be true. But here's the deal. Then why is it all of the attention, focus, energy, and resources go against the people that report to that leader? and not to the leader himself or herself.
Mhm.
And that's a shame. In sales, 95% of the resources go to sales producers. We know when they stop at a Starbucks for coffee. We know how many meetings they've had. We know everything about their day. But yet, if you say, what were their leaders doing with them? They can't tell you where they were yesterday, let alone last week or last month. So we studied coaches, and it started in business. And that's what we were fascinated with. And while there are a lot of things that were endemic to the great ones, I'll use the term coach and lead synonymously sometimes in business, but what was synonymous to the great leaders was their people described a sense of discomfort. But okay, so that's really cool. But how do you explain that? So you can't just go tell other leaders, hey, go make your people uncomfortable because that'll help them. So we had to figure out, how do you explain it? How do you measure it? But most importantly, how do you affect it? So that's where the whole discomfort journey began. And since that time, we speak about it. We've done a book on it. I mean, there's a whole, how it applies to leadership, how it applies to a coaching role. But yeah, the bottom line is, it's pretty simple. As human beings, we are wired for comfort, but growth only occurs in a state of discomfort. And while I understand that intellectually, I am by no means a perfect walking example of that. I catch myself all the time coming back to the same thought patterns, the same behaviors. I'm just better at consciously recognizing it now more than I used to be.
Which is huge. I mean, that's the level of self-awareness, and that's the ability to talk to yourself instead of listen to yourself.
I like how you said that. Yes.
Yeah, that's because sometimes when you listen to yourself, there's not a whole lot of positive things coming on. Now, so here's, and to back up a little bit, when you talk about explain it, measure it, and affect it. This is another thing I loved about the book, the amount of research, the time, energy, and that you put into research. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm a research geek. I love data. And I'm not, which is interesting because I'm not like a high-tech guy. A lot of people think, well, then, you're a researcher by trade. I'm not. I'm a sales guy by trade.
Right.
I'm a coach at heart. I'm passionate and fascinated with growth, but I like to look at it from a data standpoint, because by and large, it's funny. I was just visiting with a school, talking to their principal yesterday on their superintendent. Fascinating people, very progressive thinking. And for example, you can't look at a team of coaches and say their coaching effectiveness score one year, and then the next year look at a team of coaches and look at their coaching effectiveness score and say, well, there's no growth or whatever it is. Data is interesting. You got to cut it and slice it in different ways so it tells you a story, because it's in there. And when you cut and slice, now you can cut and slice it to make it look in your favor a lot too, if you wanted to. But the reality is, if you present data with integrity, there's a story in there that, as humans, as leaders, as coaches, I think we need that story to help us understand how we can grow, how we can improve. I love the fact that this is the Athletics of Business podcast, because now I'm comfortable bringing in athletic stories. I was talking to a basketball coach last week, a high school basketball coach, who our work with him in our research, the data showed him, and this is a guy who really wants to grow. He wants to improve. He's absolutely, completely vulnerable when it comes to tell me what I need to know to grow, to be a better coach. And his results came back, and it showed the psychological safety on his team was really, really low. But it gave him a starting point. So he wasn't guessing. He knew where to go, and he understood psychological safety, and he got all the proper resources. But his psychological safety score went from a 52 to a 79 in 12 months.
12 months, I was going to ask. Okay.
His team went from 38% winning percentage to 68% winning percentage.
There you go.
So data, now, if you looked at his total score, you'd say, oh, he's already a good coach. He scores really well. He's solid. But the data helped him analyze where to begin. And it's the same in business. If you lead a business team, Ed, if you knew what to do to get that next great growth jump, you would do it, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. But what is it? What is it I do? How is it? How am I impacting my team? So anyway, I got on soapbox there. So
have you ever showed someone here you are. These are your results. Okay. This is where you're at. What do you think moving forward? Has that ever happened to you where they push back on it?
Oh, a lot. Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I would say there's only 30 to 40% of the people, whether you're in the world of business, athletics, or even education, that say, hey, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm going to change. I'm going to do some things to change, to improve, because the results, if I improve this, everything else works, right? In business, if I improve the way I work with the people on my team, for example, in sales results will go up. My the productivity of my IT team will increase. My response rates to customers will improve. My players on my basketball team give more discretionary effort. But yeah, 30 to 40% probably take it and actively say, I'm going to get this. I'm going to do better. 30 to 40% sit around and look, and they're going to say, let's see what everybody else does. And there's probably about 30% of, so it's about a third that say, you know what? They'll either actively deny it or they will just do nothing with it.
Are they afraid it's too much work?
That's a good question. I'm thinking about that, how to respond to that.
Well, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Like we put all these resources in the salespeople, right? We put all these resources into the performers and producers. You also identified that a team is a direct reflection of their coach, yet we don't put the proper amount of resources into developing the coach. So and you and I talked about this before. I just scratched my head. Like, why wouldn't you want to be a sponge? Why wouldn't you want to be curious as how do you get better and just soak it all up and just knock it out of the park?
And if we had that one figured out, it has to do with the mind, obviously, our thoughts, and quite frankly, it has to do with order, with comfort, the idea of changing. I mean, my goodness, I always tell a story about when we're so sucked into our routines and our patterns, or what we refer to as order, because in a state of order, we have predictable known outputs, and it's predictability that makes us comfortable. And until people really intellectualize that, they can't explain why they do what they do or why they feel like they feel. Mm-hmm. But it is such a hindrance to our growth. Not that everybody should always be in a state of discomfort by any means, because it's the times of comfort that allow us for the periods of discomfort when we grow. But I remember when my wife came to me, and I'm sure probably Ed, that you're the same way. When you fly in an airport, remember back pre-pandemic when we used to use airplanes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Without masks. Yeah.
You're right, without masks. Were you pretty strong routined when you went through security, when you got everything had its place, its order, you did the same inputs every time?
Very much so. Yes.
Yeah. And we do that. And everybody I ask this, it's the same thing. I do that. I put everything in security. This stuff goes in the dog bowl. This stuff goes in the bin. The phone goes here. The keys go here. The tablet, everything has its place. And then when you get through security, belt comes back on, everything gets put back. And I follow that exact same pattern, because then I get on the airplane and my phone's not back in security, or my tablet's not back in security, or even worse, my dog's not back in security, right? Mm-hmm. And we get on the airplane, we do the same thing. We put, my phone goes here, charging cable goes here, my laptop goes here. I always get on early so I can put my carry-on straight above my head so I don't forget my carry-on, right? And if I do those same inputs, I arrive at my destination with my laptop, with my phone, with my charging cables, right? It's a very predictable outcome. I don't, it's comfortable. I don't care if I grow when I'm on an airplane, Ed. I just want to get to my destination safely and with all my stuff.
With all your stuff, yes.
And so here's how dangerous it is. Now, you could come up with a million stories on this, but several, I don't know, years ago, I remember my wife came to me one evening and she said, "Hey, I've been reading up on this new thing in airports called TSA PreCheck." And I said, "Okay, well, tell me more." And she said, "Well, we'd have to go to Omaha and go to the TSA office. They got to do a background check. You got to pay a fee. You got to fill in some forms. But they say you can navigate airports more quickly." And not only was my answer no, it was viscerally no. And it was like, don't mess. It was so predictable. I have a predictable outcome, right? Don't mess with that. And of course, you know the rest of the story, right? Months later, I'm in an airport. I'm late. I hit security, and I feel like I'm in Disney World line so long. And I look over to my left, and there's literally 5 people whipping through security. And I turn to the TSA agent, and I said, "Hey, what are those people doing?" And she said, "Oh, sir, that's our new TSA PreCheck line." Right. So my order had just prevented. Now it's stagnation. Now I'm, now it's like backwards.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the danger comfort brings.
And it's interesting in going back to the uncomfort. You said something before that I want to jump into: discretionary effort, along with the impact of a coach. Can we talk about that? Because that's huge.
Yeah, the concept of discretionary effort. It's a role. It's a coach's role, because because of you, Ed. So if you're in a coaching role, because of you, your team doesn't sell more, produce more, play better, then why are you in that role? If a sales team will sell $10 million without a coach, they better sell 12 or 13, 14 million with a coach. Right. Otherwise, what value do you bring?
Right.
So the concept of discretionary effort, how many more hours in a week will they work? How many more calls will they make? How many more drills will they run? How much more engaged are they with the team? Will they not take the call when a recruiter calls because they're so committed to you? The concept of discretionary effort is everything to a coach.
Mm-hmm. And can you define that a little bit? I failed to do that. Like what discretionary effort is, how that's a result of the coaching.
How it becomes a result of coaching?
What is it like? I know, but for the listener, what is the actual definition of discretionary effort?
At that time, I wish you hadn't have asked me that, because I'm not sure I've ever defined it. But so
no matter what you say, though, it will be correct. Just
so exactly, it's kind of like in the movie Martian. Hey,
exactly.
I'm a pirate. I can give it any definition I want. Yep. But it is the amount either given or obtained because of the result of a coach. Is how I would view it. In other words, I can give you discretionary effort, but you can also obtain it from me. And what we study and what we research is, what is it people like you, Ed, do that creates discretionary effort? And that's what we're most fascinated with, or what are the behaviors and what are the activities of the greatest coaches in business and athletics and now in the classroom.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask you real quick here, because I think as we talk about comfort, we talk about discretionary effort. I think about coaches, and you'd always play against coaches that you knew one thing: even if they didn't execute, that team was going to play hard, right? They're going to be prepared. They're going to have each other's back. They're going to be great teammates. They're going to be selfless. And that was a result of the coach, regardless if it was the business world, the athletic world, basketball world is my point of reference. And we talk about this discomfort, but we know 3 things about the workforce today. They want to be valued. They want to know that the work they do has meaning, that it's meaningful, and they want to be coached. And we get so caught up into making sure, you just mentioned, like when the recruiter calls, you don't pick up the phone because you're so happy where you're at, right? But that doesn't mean that everything's roses and really peachy. It means that you know you're growing, you know that you're being coached, you know that your work has meaning, you know that you add value to the organization, to the team. So as an outsider, someone might be looking at it and be saying, so why do I want to put my people in a state of discomfort besides the fact you tell me they can grow? And how do I do that without rocking the boat? How do you, what are the, how do you get them to that state of discomfort in a productive way?
All right, so let's unpack that a little bit, because that was a lot. And okay, so first of all, you brought up a really, really good point, which is coaches shouldn't be interested in making their people happy. Happiness is a personal state of mind. Their interest should be what creates growth, because ultimately that's what discretionary effort does. That's what I get paid to do. I've never met a business leader ever that said, hey, next year, by the way, don't expect any growth goals. Nah, we're good. We had a good year this year. If we just do what we did this year, we're all good. Never, ever once. So we're not measuring happiness. We're not performance and growth. It's not this big group kumbaya group hug fest. And that's where the discomfort piece comes in. I remember early on in our research, we were talking to some leaders of high performing business teams, and they used the word healthy tension. That they felt like there was a consistent healthy tension within their teams. So the discomfort piece was part of that discovery. Now, knowing that discomfort, so knowing people's affinities to comfort, to order, to predictable nature, to predictable outcomes, knowing that, then it's a coach's responsibility to, when needed, when necessary, when appropriate, to challenge people outside of those proverbial comfort zones. But you have to earn the right to do that. And you said something also in that statement. They have to be valued. They have to feel valued. And what we refer to it as is there's one of these primary themes. The most foundational primary theme is that of relationship, which involves trust, connections, and psychological safety. If that's not in place, although you have the formal authority to create discomfort and to challenge me and to try and get me to grow and to do more and to provide that discretionary effort, you're probably not going to get it.
Right. And I want to go back to something I use in most of my keynotes, the psychological safety piece. That is not to be confused with soft. That's psychological. But people do that, though, do they not?
Yeah. And not only they do that, we see it in our research. They focus so much on relationships, they think they can't push their players anymore, especially in the world of sports. We see that. So we see relationship scores go up, but challenge scores go down. And we're talking, no. When you raise relationship, that gives you the right to push them more. It should be the opposite of that. But anyway, yes, to your point.
Well, you think about the coaches in your life and the leaders in your life that you had worked with that made the biggest impact in your life, and those are the ones that made you better. I mean, those are ones that knew when to push you, they knew when to pull you, they knew how to talk to you. Those were the ones that you have those deep relationships. I mean, you're not going to go back for a Hall of Fame induction. First of all, there wouldn't be a Hall of Fame induction for a coach who just wants to be your buddy, right? Or just wants things to be and just let's win on talent alone, or you're good, I got this. You're going to come play for me for 4 years. You may not get a lot of better, but we'll win some games, right? Or you're going to come work for me here for a few years, and you know what? You'll make good money. You won't make the great money. You'll never be, so sought after because you're probably not going to get a lot better. And eventually the market's going to outpace you and we're going to have to, those aren't the people you want to be around. And I don't get why we don't understand that more as leaders.
That's a good question. I think part of it's education. I think there's also a gap between intellectual understanding and emotional readiness. Right. Because if I am naturally, we use the term a catalytic coach, someone who's a catalyst for growth, which means, you said another way, you're a catalyst for creating discomfort, you're a catalyst for challenge, catalyst for change. Um, so if that is not your nature, even though you intellectually understand it makes sense, I'm not emotionally ready to change what I do to make it happen.
Mhm.
And I think there's a chasm sometimes between that
Absolutely.
intellectual understanding and emotional readiness.
Yeah, and I want to clarify something. I'm not saying we don't get it as a whole. We do. I should have said why some folks don't get it, but you just brought up a great point. What if it's not your nature? Like, what if you really want to do it? Okay, you know you need to make your folks a little bit uncomfortable to help them grow, and you want to push them, but you just don't know how do you work with folks to get them to that point that they're able to do it.
Uh, there's not a single way ever. It's kind of like uh, running any effective team. There's not one thing great leaders or coaches do. That's a bunch of things. And in terms of answering that question directly, number one, we have to get them to, I think first and foremost, we hope to get them to think differently. And so that's done through education. Now, that doesn't always work, but that's a method, right? So if I can think about it differently, it changes my reality, then my reality changes my behavior.
Mhm.
So that's one way. The other way is through watching others do it and seeing how it's done, and kind of, so either through case study or through witness or through role play, watching how it's done through others. And another way, which we don't do much of because it's hard, it's doing mental exercises.
Mhm.
It is quite literally things like meditation, mindfulness practices,
Mhm.
gratitudes, things you're going, what? How does that change? Well, it's like everything else. You just can't be a great free throw shooter without practicing shooting free throws for many, many years. And the same thing, you want to make your mind more resilient. You want to make your mind more open. You want to be able to shift and change and evolve. You have to practice that.
Mhm.
And the way to practice that are through some of those techniques that I just described.
As you're talking about this and going back to the psychological safety, but then we're talking about discomfort, right? One of the things I like to talk to my clients about a lot, especially my executive coaching clients, is you need to be the face and voice that your team needs, right? You need to be the face your team needs to see and the voice your team needs to hear. But then I'm sitting there thinking to myself, wait a minute, I'm telling them to make your people comfortable, but in reality, it's during adversity and during times of challenges and stuff. But can you talk about this? The difference between compassion and comfort. In other words, the ability as a leader, as a coach, to show compassion to your people, but not be putting them in a state of comfort, right? Helping them still get to that state of discomfort to grow.
Well, let me preface that. Man, you're asking good questions. Let me preface that with this. You can't live a life of discomfort all the time.
Right.
It's time to, we all have our order. We all have those things that allow us to be comfortable to prep us for times of discomfort. The compassion has nothing to do with going easy or being soft or being uncomfortable. If you have true compassion, I used this story in my TED Talk about my daughter's tennis that you and I were referencing earlier. If you have compassion, you will know that allowing them to be uncomfortable, to spend a little time in misery, is a good thing. Because, and when you think about it, when you go rescue somebody, when you allow your compassion to make somebody's life easier, now I'm not talking about say somebody with who's in depression or somebody who's destitute. I'm talking about the working world, the athletic world, the classroom, things like that, right?
Right.
Your compassion should not allow you to disallow growth. And here's what I mean by that. Seeing somebody struggle with a problem in school is not give you permission to go solve that problem for them.
Right.
It's to let them suffer for a while. It's to let them be in misery with that for a while. So allow them to learn that for a while. To, to see in the business world somebody struggle with a proposal, or somebody struggling with a question during a sales call, or whatever the situation may be. It's not your job to bail them out. And I think that's where people get in the way. It's my heart hurts for you, but I know enough about this to know my job is not to remove the obstacle for you, is to teach you how to remove that obstacle. I will not do it for you. And I don't know if that's where you're heading or not.
Absolutely, because and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Sports specific, the parents that remove all these obstacles from their children are completely eliminating opportunities for growth. They're cheating their kids and they don't get it. Just like in a business world, if you bail people out, you're cheating them. And you nailed it. I mean, that's exactly, because I have compassion for you that you're going through this, but I also know that's what's right. I know it's best for you. So just figure it out.
Yeah. Our director of marketing one time said something, and I can't remember if it was to me or I just overheard her say it. She said, "Yeah, Bill cares enough to make me uncomfortable when it's appropriate." And I remember thinking, wow, that's arguably one of the best compliments I ever had.
Right.
Bill
Because
cares enough to make me uncomfortable when it's appropriate.
think about that. Think about that. And you're not trying to make folks uncomfortable through fear. You're not trying to lead by fear. That's not the type of uncomfortable we're talking about.
Right. Fear does create discretionary effort, by the way. But so there is healthy discretionary effort, healthy challenge, healthy discomfort, and unhealthy. You're right. Because fear can be a motivator, and that sucks.
Yeah. Big time. Big time. You said something. No, it was in the book. And it says great leaders, great coaches are here to be exceptional. Can you talk about that? Because, and you talk about high growth coaches, not just high impact, but high growth coaches, and they're here to be exceptional. Can you talk about, I love words. The word exceptional to me has a lot of power. What does that mean to you?
Uh, statistically, it means 9 percentage points. And when I say that,
Mm-hmm.
when we study great to elite or good to great, the separators in there, when we study their coaching acumen, their overall coaching scores, it's only separated by 9 percentage points. So that means great is like an 89 and good is an or maybe it's 8 percentage points, regardless of what. I think great is an 89 and just good is an 81. Mm-hmm. And you're thinking, because I remember when I first saw that data, I remember thinking, oh, I thought there'd be a big, and then it hit me, it's like, no, it makes perfect sense. Because the difference between a great athlete and just a good athlete is probably really small things. Mm-hmm. The difference between what, a great football program does and a good football program does are just really small little things. In business, the difference between great leaders and good leaders is just small little things. They just do things, they do a lot of the same things, they just do them a little bit differently. Like a great coach in business doesn't just give feedback, they give it the right way. Mm-hmm. And they also usually provide, at least a few times a year, written feedback. Mm-hmm. Well, just the act of writing it out and providing it, we see in our research, makes a huge difference. So that good to exceptional, good to great, great to elite, however you want to define it, is pretty small. It's just that so few coaches are willing to make up that gap, to do those things differently. And if you align that to the world sport, I mean, it's the same thing. The difference between a PGA tour golfer and a mini tour golfer is about a one handicap difference.
And we know this, that as a whole, we're guilty of comparing our greatest intention with others' biggest flaws or biggest weaknesses, however you want to word it. And I feel like sometimes folks may look at a coach and say, I mean, it's not that special what he does. I could do that. Yeah, but you don't. And he or she does on a consistent basis, day after day after day. And that little thing is what makes them one of the elite. It's one of those things that will make them, a Hall of Fame coach or a sought after coach. And I love the fact you point that out. It's the little things. And it's
Yeah.
just, you're not overwhelming people saying you need to make these massive changes the way you go about coaching. You just have
No,
to
it's so in business, for example, here we go, athletics of business. They will shoot somebody text at the end of the day. Hey, how was your day today? They will follow how'd that call go? How is your meeting with Jane? They'll send them a card on their birthday. It's little things that get that discretionary effort. When I'm following great coaches in the gym versus good coaches, when the players are stretching, warming up, let's use volleyball as an example. The good coaches are like talking to each other and they're laughing and chuckling and just, letting the kids go about their warm-ups. Great coaches, they're working that room. They walk up to an athlete and they say, hey, how's your grandfather doing? I know he was sick last week. Yeah, and they kind of move on. Oh, did you get your nails done? I like that color on you. They go up to the next person. Hey, how's that puppy? Is she, they're continuing these bonding connections, for example, versus just yucking amongst themselves. Little things, Ed, just little things.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Well, before I ask you the last question, can you share with our listeners where they can find out more about Excel Institute? Where, again, we will put the link to the book, The Coaching Effect. We'll put that in the show notes, but where they can find out more about you, your keynote speaking, okay, and anything else you'd like to share.
Well, that's very kind of you, and thank you for that opportunity. As you said, our company is called Excel Institute. It's ECSELL Institute.com. My personal website is BillEckstrom.com. The TED Talk that we've been talking about is Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life. And you can just find that on YouTube. And the book is called The Coaching Effect. And I am on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I connect with everybody. If they reach out, if you have any questions, one of the things I think I'm most proud of, Ed, is with the exception of one time where it got creepy, since the TED Talk, I probably have had, hundreds and hundreds of people reach out to me. I have answered every single one personally.
That's awesome.
Never have I not. So if somebody wants to ask me a question or reach out or connect, absolutely I will.
Yeah, I'll ask you about the creepy punt one when we're done recording. You can't leave that hanging out there, and I don't follow up with that. But I don't know the story, so I'm not going to ask it while we're recording. I'm going to save my editor the work. All right. No, that's fair. Now, I have to ask you, as we start to wrap things up, you've recently launched Excel Sports, okay? And we really connected on so many different levels here and the things that we've talked about. But one question I failed to ask you, if you could give us three, if it's one, if it's two, if it's three, you don't have to go any more than three, the three keys that you've seen to the elite coaches, to the high growth coaches, what are the three consistent characteristics or traits that show up? And granted, there can be more than three, but if you could just keep it narrow for our listener and share that with us.
Not in order of importance, but I will give you three.
Okay.
Number one is relationships. You can never, ever, ever be a great coach without having strong trust-based relationships. Okay. Now there are different pieces and components of that, but that's number one. Number two is order. You have to have some predictable natures about you and your team. And here's what I mean when I say that. Sometimes we don't think of order as something as simple as this, which is how do you show up to work every day, Ed?
Every day. Yep.
When you walk into the office or in front of your team, does your team kind of look at each other and mumble, oh crap, I wonder what kind of mood Ed's in today?
Right.
Be predictable that way.
Yep.
And also the best order, to be predictable, and don't ever make your team guess whether or not you care about them. That should be no predictability in that. I mean, that should be highly predictable. I mean, no guessing in that. So that's number two. So number one, relationship. Number two, order. And number three, challenge. It's easy. You have to find ways to make the world uncomfortable. And when you do number one, and when you do number two, you have the right to do number 3. You've earned the right, because not only have you earned it, you know me.
I love it. That was completely unscripted, and there could not have been a better way to end this unbelievable conversation. Honestly, you nailed it. That was awesome, Bill.
Okay.
I appreciate you. I appreciate your time, and I'm really looking forward to all the amazing feedback I am sure we're going to get on this conversation.
Ed, thank you. This has been fun. Arguably one of the most fun I've ever had on a podcast, because you're right. I love the way you question. I love your enthusiasm, and I will do anything to help you.
Well, I appreciate it. And likewise, we talked about that before. Likewise, and keep doing your great work. We need more Excel institutes. No, we just need one. We need you guys to do all the work. But I love what you guys are doing.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us tonight. I think maybe a few months down the road, we'll get you back on again to see how Excel Sports Division is going and see the parallels.
I'll certainly have some data to share with you.
And we do love our data, don't we?
That's right.
Hey, Bill, thank you again.
You bet, Ed. Take care.